Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to sculpt wrinkles, and not only I'm going to show you the tools, I'm actually going to be giving you a little bit of theory that I consider is very important to understand in order to do amazing wrinkles. But before that, I do have a very special message for you, my friends. One of the first goals that I had when I started this new project was to make sure that you guys had all of the necessary tools to start your 3D journey, and now we have it. We have our Introduction to Blender course with our Weapons course, we have our Introduction to ZBrush course with the Character Creation course, and we got our Introduction to Maya course with our newly released Stylized 3D Worlds. So this was one of the main things that I wanted to focus. I wanted to give you guys all of the necessary steps and tools so that when I start releasing the new Advanced course, which are coming very soon, you get all of the necessary knowledge and skills to follow along and create amazing things. I want to thank you guys very from the bottom of my heart, because I did not imagine that we were going to get to this point so fast. We're almost at 3K subscribers here in the YouTube channel, or a little bit over 3K. We're going big on Twitch as well. We have an amazing Discord community that I love checking every single day, and it's all thanks to you. So if you want to support the channel, the best way to do it right now is with the courses. If you're missing one of them and you think it's information that's valuable to you, please be my guest. In the description, we're going to have the links to the Udemy thing. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's go back to the video, and after that, I'm going to go back into building the next premium course. Thanks again, my friends, and enjoy. Very well, so we got this character right here, which I did for our Sculptober event that's going on right now in our Discord channel, and I thought it was going to be a great idea to keep working on this guy and show you some of the techniques that we can use to create wrinkles. Now, wrinkles are one of those things that people think it's just easy because we can use alphas, and even though alphas are indeed one way to do it, I want to teach you guys a little bit more of the secrets behind how to do realistic wrinkles. And the first secret, the first thing you should always go for, reference. If you take a look at all of these old man faces, you're gonna see the wrinkles are very different. We have very shallow and small wrinkles right here. We have very bulgy and interesting wrinkles over here. I'm not sure if that's AI though. So there's a little bit of everything when we look at wrinkles. I love this one. This looks very cool. I'm not sure it's AI. I don't think so. But it looks very nice. It's going to allow me to show you some of the important things. So remember when we're sculpting, I covered this in our ZBrush course, and we're going through this sort of list of primary forms, which are the proportions and the main shapes, secondary forms, and then tertiary forms. Well, whenever I'm dealing with wrinkles, I want to follow, or I like to follow, the same sort of effect. And I got 3 steps pretty much. I got the primary wrinkles, secondary wrinkles, and then what I call the micro details. So primary wrinkles are going to be all of these big wrinkles that you see right here. And in order for us to properly sculpt wrinkles and create wrinkles in our characters, we need to understand what wrinkles are. So our skin is an organ. In case you didn't know that, our skin is technically an organ. And the interesting thing about the skin is that it's made out of collagen and a lot of other things. And as we age, we lose elasticity on it. So instead of having this very nice and tight skin, we start losing elasticity, and the fibers, they start becoming a little bit more loose. So wrinkles are nothing more than the skin kind of folding on top of itself. And that's the first thing about wrinkles. A lot of people, when they're doing wrinkles, they just think of wrinkles as dips that go into the skin, like a carve. So they would go into ZBrush, grab the Damien standard, for instance, and then just start covering wrinkles like that. And even though that's going to give you a nice detail, a wrinkle is actually, yes, a dip, but it's also a little bit of a bulge out, okay? Because again, the skin kind of folds on top of itself, and we get this very interesting effect. So all of the big wrinkles that you see right here in the character, those are the type of wrinkles that usually follow the main or big muscles of the face. So we got, for instance, the frontal muscle over here, the orbicularis oris over here, we got the nasolabial fold over here, the orbicularis oris over here. So all of these muscles are going to create the main big wrinkles that we're going to see on the face. And I recommend for this one using the Damien standard, but there's a little secret that I'm going to show you. Now, the secondary shapes of the wrinkles are going to be those little small wrinkles that you're going to see here and there. And for those, alphas are really good. I'm going to show you how to use some of these alphas as well. But there's also a little bit of hand sculpting that you can do for this ones, especially if you want to create a little bit more of a break. And finally, micro details, which are the pores and the super small fibers of the skin. That's definitely going to be alphas. And sometimes, depending on the productions, you're not even going to be able to add those because the character is going to be very far away and you're not even gonna see it. So as long as you do the first and second stage, you're gonna be in a really good position. And depending on how much budget you have in textures and in poly count, you might be able to go into the micro detail right here. Micro detail is another one of those things that usually I will do in textures instead of on ZBrush, because if you do micro detail on ZBrush and then you decimate things, you lose a lot of the detail, and then it's a little bit difficult to recover it later on. So let's focus on the eyes, which are of course one of the most important parts of our character. I'm going to change to Damien Standard, but I'm not going to use the default brush, because the default brush, as you can see, has a very like fake soft like effect, and I don't like it. Of course you need to use a tablet. If you're not using a tablet while using ZBrush, what are you doing, my friend? Come on, you got to invest in a little of equipment right there to make sure that you get the best experience. So we're going to change the alpha to a lot of a sharper alpha. I personally like using alpha 45. And what you're going to do is you're going to start drawing the wrinkles. We're going to start with like big wrinkles, but you want to release a little bit of the pressure on your stroke as you go and try to add them. Now, very common mistake. People will do long like lines, like wrinkles like this. That's not how wrinkles work. And you can see it like here. They're kind of like overlapping on top of each other. So if we see it right here, you can see that there's no straight line going all the way across. So here I like to use a little technique that I call the crisscross technique, where I'll just like do a little bit of a crisscross, always following the direction of the wrinkle that I want to add. But as you can see, creating a little bit of an overlap of the wrinkles of my character like this. Now, again, it's very important that we look at the reference, because the reference is going to tell us where the big wrinkles are going to be. So you can see that we're going to have a very, very strong wrinkle here underneath the eye. And that's where you can like really start pushing. Now, another small secret about wrinkles is that you do need quite a bit of geometry. So if you're going to be doing a game or a character for a game, for like a mobile game, and this is the max distance that you're going to be seeing the character, like there's never going to be like a close up of the character at this point, then this amount of resolution, as you can see, is more than enough. We are at 3.3 million polygons for the face, and we can see a nice amount of detail. But if we're going to really go here into the close up, we definitely need a little bit more. So I'm going to Control D here to add a little bit more resolution. And now I'm going to change my clay buildup alpha to something that's round and a little bit like sharp. And that is what I'm going to use to add a little bit of the bulge that I was mentioning. Okay, the little like foldy skin that's on top of this thing. And I'm going to add that sort of, again, in this sort of like crisscross way to generate a very nice detail right here. See that? That's the kind of effect that we want to build. Now, wrinkles, they happen pretty much like stitches in cloth, so they will never merge into a single line. There's always going to be like a little bit of crisscross between things. Look at this guy right here. So you can see, for instance, the big eyelid that we have here on the top of the eye is going to fold on top of the lower part of the eye. So in this case, I'm going to continue my wrinkle over here, and then I'm going to start adding a little bit of volume to close or create the continuation of that element right there. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to give us a very, very interesting and realistic look on our face. You can see sometimes wrinkles are going to kind of like, again, bulge out quite a bit. Another very cool thing that we can do here is mask out a little area. For instance, this area right here. And then with this clay buildup again, we just add a little bit of that extra fold. Smooth a little bit if you don't want it to be super harsh. And then when we release, look at that. We get a very, very interesting like wrinkle that we can continue with a little bit of Damien Standard here to give it a more visual interest. Another very, very common mistake that I see people make when they're sculpting skin and wrinkles and all of these things is that they want to nail it at the first go, like at the first time. And usually this sort of things, it takes a little bit more time to do so. So for instance, you can see that the lower eyelid here on the character, it's a lot sharper. So I'm going to add the wrinkles, and then with Trim Dynamic, I'm going to erase and carve in to the skin to create like an interesting, like flat, squishy area right there. I can also use a little bit of clay buildup here to remove some elements. And then by smoothing this, all of this, we do erase all of the things that we just did, but we create layers, interesting layers that are gonna like just allow us to build up the wrinkles of the eyes in a more natural way. So instead of trying to make sure that we nail it from the very first like line, try to focus on building up those elements a little bit more into like layers. Let's take a look at this one, for instance, and I see a secondary layer going in this area. Now, this character is not super old, so I shouldn't be pushing the wrinkles too much, but I'm exaggerating them so that you can see the example that I'm going for. Sometimes with like undead creatures and things like that, we can really push it. For instance, here I'm gonna push it there. I'm gonna carve in, smooth out, add a little bit of a skin tag right there. There we go. And then again, smooth. Clean up all of those elements for now. Because now, if I go back with my dimming standard, it's not going to be the exact same as what we had before. And by creating that little bit of a variation on the elements, we're going to be able to create something, again, very interesting. Now, wrinkles do have a sort of like order, and you're going to have to study each specific part of the body to understand where these wrinkles go. So for instance, in the case of the eyes, they kind of like irradiate out, and you can see this in a lot of like designs in Diablo and things like that. But you're going to see that wrinkles again go from like the center of the eye out, kind of like a race. So what we can do here is we can start adding some of those lines like this. But these are more like tension lines. Like you're not going to see like super big lines on the eyes. So you can see like maybe one big eye line right there. So again, just play a little bit with these things and then smooth them out, okay? Smooth them out. And we're going to start layering this up and creating a very, very interesting mix and something that looks way, way more natural than just us drawing like a straight line across the character. Oh, this one's really good. I always suggest going for this sort of like high contrasty effects. And this one allows me to show you another type of wrinkle. Look at this guys right here. There's other types of wrinkles that are kind of like tension wrinkles where you're going to see them cross across like big gaps. So in this case, for instance, we can add a little bit of this tension wrinkles right here. But as you can see, it doesn't really matter which kind of like a primary wrinkle we're working on. It's very like manually intensive, right? Like hand painted, hand drawn, hand sculpted. So you're not going to be able to solve all of these wrinkles just like traditionally with an alpha or something like that. We're going to have to work a little bit and sculpt all of these primary forms that we have right here. There we go. I like to tense some of them up. And then again, trim dynamic is a great tool to smooth things out. And then with smooth, but very softly, you're going to just press very, very softly. And then if you feel like you're losing a little bit of the like interesting effects, you can always just come back and redo it. And again, always with the sort of like crisscross technique. And you can see how those eyes are looking way, way, way meaner. I really like this. Now, I do want to change the shape. I feel like this is going a little bit too far out. So I'm going to push the wrinkles in a little bit more. There we go. Let's go back to the standard. Again, clean a little bit there. And here's where you can start going crazy. Like once you understand the principle of these wrinkles, you can start inventing things. Of course, always following reference, but just stylizing things or exaggerating things a little bit more. So for instance, for this character, I came up with the idea of having this like very intense like race, like just like punching out of the eyes. So here's where we can start again, just crisscrossing and manually adding all of these elements right here. I've seen some people like hand sculpt every single thing, like not using absolutely any alpha, which you are free to do. It's definitely going to take a little bit more time, but you're going to get something very unique, because that's the problem with alphas. Alphas are great. I'm going to show you in just a second how we can utilize them to generate a very cool like result, very cool effect. I really like using alphas. They save a lot of time, but one of the bad things, or not bad things, but like one of the disadvantages of using alphas is that if everyone has access to the same alphas, then all of the things that we're doing are going to be looking very, very similar. So it's important that we always try to do a little bit of hand-painted stuff, especially, for instance, here on the center of the face and things like that. Here's where you can really, really push your hand-painted thing, or not hand-painted, hand-sculpted thing, and just create something that's very, very interesting. Now, another thing that's important here, and you might notice it, is that we're only focusing on the eyes for now, and that's definitely creating a sort of feel of incompletion, because everything else is very smooth, and the eyes are like occupying most of the effect. That's one of the things that I mentioned in my courses. You should always try to work on everything at the same time, like at the same level of detail. So if I'm already at a good point in the primary shapes of my wrinkles right here, the next thing that I need to do is to start working a little bit on the primary forms of other parts of the character. So all of these areas, for instance, I'm just going to start adding, you know, a little bit of something to make sure that it's looking interesting, because otherwise it looks very, very smooth. So there we go. We got a good result right here. Of course, usually for a face, you're going to spend hours and hours working on it. Right now, we've only been working on this for like 12 minutes. So just keep in mind that that's something that's going to be depending on the project. And again, on the distance where you're eventually going to be seeing this character. I'm not going to spend the same amount of time for a character that's going to be on the background, like an NPC or something that's just going to be on a cinematic or something, that for the main character that's going to be on the cover of the game, right? So everything has a sort of effect. Breaking symmetry is another very important thing that I strongly recommend. So for instance, here I'm going to break symmetry and add a little bit of the frontal elements. And as you can see, I always try to dance around. Like, I don't like doing one straight line. Then we just smooth things out. And then I find the wrinkle that I like in between all of these lines. And then I just work from there. Smooth it out again. And then remember, clay build up a little bit here to add some volume. We don't want the wrinkles to be flat, so just like a scratch going into the element. We always want to add a little bit more depth right there. Now I had this sort of like crosses going around, and I am gonna bring them back, but they're supposed to be like scars. So for scars, I like to use clay buildup and then just go very crazy like this. Gives me a very like sort of random turn on symmetry. Gives me this very sort of like random damage surface. And for this particular character, that's what I was going for. I'm not gonna hit the eyelid. And then he had this sort of like process on the bottom part right here. There we go. It's supposed to be like a vampire, right? So I'm adding a little bit of extra detail right there. Cool. So this would be what I would normally call the primary stage of wrinkles. We get a very good detail, and usually the rate that you want to go for is to around this distance. You should be able to look at your character at this distance and be like, yeah, that looks good. If it looks good at this distance, now we can zoom in again, as we've been working on, and we can start working on all of the surface, because you can see that all of the surface needs a little bit more, you know, oomph, right? So I'm gonna go to the standard brush. I'm gonna go to a light box, and I'm just gonna use the basic alphas that we have right now. I don't like using some of my pro alphas that I got from XYZ because they're a little bit advanced. I am gonna use them a little bit more, but I want to show you what you can get with just very simple alphas. So for instance, this one right here, leathery skin, is really good. I'm just gonna double click. It's gonna be right here. And I'm going to change this to drag rect, of course. And when we drag this on top of that element, we're going to be able to get some more like interesting lines that are going to play with the previous lines that we have. Now here, there's a couple of things that you can do. First, we're going to change this to C-sub, of course, so that we go in. And I'm going to reduce the intensity a little bit, something that's not too much. So something like 15, I would say. It's a good number in this particular case. It might change with yours. And I'm going to go to layers. Layers are a great way to control this sort of thing. So I'm going to create a new layer. And now if I start adding my wrinkles, which in this case, I'm going to add sort of like following the sort of like round shape and round direction of my eyes, as you can see, we can generate a very, very interesting effect without having to sculpt everything on our own. Like those ones are definitely a little bit too intense. So I'm going to lower the intensity. And as you can see, the important thing about using alphas is to always follow the direction of the main like wrinkles that we have on the body. And this are going to allow me to create that sort of effect. For instance, here on the nasolabial fold, another trick is to change this to spray. And we can just like go around and around. And this is going a little bit into the micro detail, which we're going to see in a second, but that's going to break up the surface. Look at how nice that breaks up the surface. Like for instance, here on the nose, that's looking very, very like boring. This is going to break it up very, very nicely. Let's go back to drag rect. I'm going to break symmetry. And for instance, I can start adding some interesting effects here on the eyebrow, right? Now, the more precise you are in this stage, the better. And the cool thing about this, guys, is you will eventually find a couple of areas that might get a little bit tricky. And that's what you're going to go back to your Damien standard, and you're going to help this new sort of like alpha that you're using to blend a little bit better with some hand sculpted wrinkles that we're going to be adding right here. So as you can see, by adding this hand sculpted wrinkles, we're going to be able to blend all of these alphas that we just created and generate something that looks a lot more interesting. And again, the cool thing is this has all vanilla layers. So if at any point I don't want to like remove it or play around with something else, I can just like tweak this down, right? Like bring this down into a softer effect and play around with how intense or not I want this whole thing to be. In this case, I do want to keep it all the way on the top. So let's go all the way to the top. We can click on the record button again. And for instance, here, I want to add some like cuts to the skin, just to add, again, a little bit more of a visual interest on the forms of my character. And this should look good, I would say, at roughly this distance right here. Like this is the kind of distance that you want to go for in this particular like effect, which is the secondary shapes of our wrinkles. Now, again, as I mentioned on the previous stage, the more time you dedicate to this area, the more like incredible your results can be. So spend as much time as you need, like just tweaking and making sure that this thing looks as nice as possible. For instance, here, I'm gonna start adding some folds on the nose and stuff. just to make him a little bit more angry. And don't worry too much about the high frequency detail that we just added. We can erase that right now. I'll explain how to bring it back in just a second. Because again, right now we're focusing on primary and secondary forms. So all of this like little noise that we see right here, that's the noise that I mentioned that sometimes when you bake this down into textures, you lose a lot of that detail. So a lot of the times I'm not even going to be adding that into my characters because I'll rather just wait in Substance Painter and add it there. And that way I'm going to be able to calibrate it with the size of textures that we're going to be using for production. So it's a slightly different way to work of not sculpting the high frequency detail and just waiting until the texturing stage so that you know how much or not you're going to be adding on the character. But yeah, this one looks good. Let's break symmetry here a little bit. It's a little bit more of a folds here. There we go. Of course, we can add things like moles or acne or things like that. I don't know, like another cut, for instance. Let me stand there and let's add a strong cut, like a knife cut right there. Let's add another one right there. Right, so you can see how now that we have a lot of geometry and a lot of flow with our elements, it's going to be very, very easy and very cool to add all of these things. Now let's finally jump to the last part, which is the tertiary detail. And here I do have my X, Y, and Z textures, which are textures that are like literal scans from people. So for instance, if I double click this one right here, let's go to standard brush, double click this one right here. I'm going to have this texture right here, which as you can see is like a skin texture, very cool skin texture. I'm going to change this to CF, and as you can see, that's the sort of like skin that we're going for. Look at that detail. That's really cool. Let's increase the intensity, but there's a little bit of a problem. First, as you can see, we might need more resolution. Even though we're at 13.4 millions, you can see that this still looks a little bit pixelated. So if you really want to get like the super intense resolution, you might need to push it even more. I do think my computer should be able to handle it. So I'm gonna bake down this layer. So I'm gonna bake all. Now we don't have layers, but I'm going to be able to subdivide once more. And we're going to be like at, I don't know. There you go. 60 million polygons or something. So now if we do this, you can see that we can hold all of the detail from the texture because these are super high quality textures. Sometimes they go on sale, so I recommend getting those. But one thing that you need to do is you need to go to alpha and on the modify options, make sure you set the mid value to 50. Otherwise, these things are going to be pushing up and it's going to look a little bit weird. So set the mid value to 50. And that's what we get right there. Now, of course, the intensity is a little bit too much. So let's go back to like a 7. And that's the micro detail. So we can start using all of this to get a very cool micro detail across the whole thing. Right now, I don't have, what's the word? I don't have symmetry turned on. So this is going to give me a very nice asymmetrical distribution of this pores. The only thing that I need to do is I need to make sure that we get like the scale properly. Now, when you buy this sort of like packages, you're going to see like specific elements, like it's going to be like Chica skin and, oh, sorry, it's, I think the encoding is having a little bit of an issue because we're working with very high polygons. Let me finish like dropping this and I'll show you what I mean. So what I was mentioning is when you buy this sort of like packages, like scan packages and things like that, you're going to get specific like names and you're going to get things like cheek like patterns and then lip patterns and things like that. Like I believe this is like an eye pattern. So I'm just going to double click. And then if we drop this, you can see that the wrinkles are slightly different. And that's the kind of stuff that we're looking for. I'm going to make this a little bit more intense. So same thing, we need to go to alpha, change the mid value to 50. And these are like the things that we would expect on the underside of the eyes. So let's bring the intensity down and here's what we get. And that's it. Now, it might seem like overkill because this is a lot of information, right? But sometimes, especially if you're doing like super advanced cinematics and things like that, you might need to go to the super advanced level that we're seeing right there. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. That's the secret to sculpting wrinkles, like summarized in only 20 minutes, of course, or a little bit over 20 minutes, because this process that I'm doing here for the character is a process that usually takes days. with hours, days, sometimes weeks to make sure that everything looks as perfect as possible. So make sure you remember your primary forms, and make sure you remember your secondary forms, and make sure you use micro details in the right way. And I can guarantee that you're going to be making amazing things in no time as well. And yeah, again, thank you very much for everything, my friends. If you want to support the channel, we got premium courses where we cover this and a lot of very cool things as well. Make sure to check the links down here in the description, and I'll be seeing you back on our next events, live streams, and here in YouTube. So thank you very much, and I'll see you back on the next one. Bye-bye.